The New South Wales Government has announced a $1 billion COVID rescue package aimed to support businesses crippled by restrictions. The package will provide money and rapid tests for businesses burdened by Omicron. Traders who have lost more than 40% of their turnover will be able to claim up to 20% of their payroll. But Sky News understands Prime Minister Scott Morrison personally vetoed any federal involvement. Joining me now is Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute and Daniel Wild from the Institute of Public Affairs. Great to see you both. Let's get into it. First to you, Ebony. Is this too little too late from the New South Wales Government or spot on the money at this time for businesses dealing with the state's shadow lockdown?
I think if you're a small business, it's probably too little too late. Removing restrictions and opening up was supposed to be good for business and good for the economy. Instead, over summer, we've seen it was a disaster, worse than lockdown, because governments opened up before they were prepared. We didn't have enough RAT tests. Our test, trace, isolate and quarantine system was quickly overtaken. And of course, huge sections of the workforce were out either sick or isolating. And in contrast to the lockdowns, there was no income support in place here. So while I think it's certainly a bold decision of the federal government to not choose to match this funding in an election year, it's consistent with withdrawing other income support as they have over time. But I think certainly business will welcome this, even though it's belated. But I think income support probably should have been in place right from the start, because what we saw happen over the summer really was what public health professionals predicted, and the reality is we can't have a healthy economy without a healthy workforce.
The partnership between Dominic Perrottet and Scott Morrison doesn't seem to be the same as it was between Gladys Berejiklian and Scott Morrison.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. Dominic Perrottet last year, upon becoming Premier, went to the press club and talked about the fact that there's been a bit of a shift in the balance of power to the states during the pandemic, and that's something he would like to cement, that in his role as Treasurer, that he had more in common with Labor state treasurers than he often did with his Commonwealth Liberal counterparts. And so I think, he's got a big agenda there. But I think for Scott Morrison, he's got a much more straightforward problem. That is that Gladys Berejiklian was a very popular Premier. And I guess we won't know about Dominic Perrottet, but certainly he's going to be less popular than Gladys Berejiklian. And Scott Morrison's facing a federal election where New South Wales is going to be crucial. Australia Institute research out this weekend shows that in at least 2 blue ribbon Liberal seats of Wentworth and North Sydney, the Liberals are in some real trouble from independent challengers and I guess seem to be a bit out of touch with the community on issues like support for funding for the ABC in the long term and securing its independence and seeing it as part of a critical and healthy democracy. So I think interesting times ahead for that relationship.
Australia Institute has been critical of the federal government's climate policies. We saw at COP26, Australia deliberately avoiding adding its name to a list of more than 40 countries pledging to phase out coal power in decades. Matt Canavan saying the watered-down coal-cutting agreement from the Glasgow summit was a green light for more coal production. What's your take on the federal government throwing money at targeted responses and how that fits in with their current climate objectives with fossil fuels?
Yeah, well, let's put it in perspective, shall we? $50 million for koalas is a bit of a drop in the bucket when you consider that 3 billion animals were killed or injured in the Black Summer bushfires caused by climate change, or certainly made worse by climate change, and $1 billion over 10 years for the Great Barrier Reef is an absolute joke compared to the $10 billion that the federal coalition government spends each and every year, along with the state government, subsidising gas and coal, the gas and coal industry around Australia. The International Energy Agency has said that if we are to avoid dangerous climate change and meet net zero by 2050 in terms of emissions, there can be no new gas and coal projects. But the federal coalition government has more than 100 gas and coal projects in the pipeline, each and every one of which makes climate change worse. And the biggest subsidy that they all get is, of course, that they pollute absolutely for free. And every new gas and coal project is basically doing us damage. It's cumulative damage that accrues over time. And that's why this is such a a disappointing announcement from the coalition government, but it's certainly in line with their policies to rapidly expand the fossil fuel industry and ignore the perils of climate change.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.